is Groundeffected. My name is your dad, and I'm genuinely excited for this model in this video. That is because this is Stitch from Toon Studios. And while these are the clear parts for the model, I've got all the other parts printed in standard resin across multitudes of printers because it's quite a large model. Now that the parts are all nice and clean, I can take them to go and get cured, and once they're cured, I can start building this model. That's not how you're supposed to do it. I may have skipped ahead a little bit, but this video was sponsored by Toon Studios, and while I prepare to start painting this model, I've already done some things in the background that you didn't see. And that was to use this Chaos Black to give everything a primer, all the parts that I need to be dark and black, because black is a really good color to start from, at least for my style anyway. Now this is obviously our color scheme, but annoyingly all my paints are out, and that is because, you might not know this, but on my own Patreon we offer a full breakdown of the colors for each project. These are not the colors for this project, but this is from last week, and I need to put these away before I can start. By the way, that is not only just a color list of colors, it is also extra content. There is behind the scenes pictures. You will know what I'm doing before I know what you won't, because I'll have to tell you. Personal promo aside, there is a literal personal promo aside, let's get into this video and let's talk about how I'm going to choose the colors that I'm going to use to paint this model. I'm convinced that often people's biggest hurdle is actually figuring out what colors to paint the model in the first place, especially because as a hobbyist it is our tendency to buy every single paint that ever existed on the planet Earth, and this makes it difficult for us to choose colors. However, I have a very systematic way of doing this, and I'm going to try to explain it to you right now. Now, the first thing I need to concentrate on is the base. And the reason that I need to do that is because the base is a simple color. It's basically just gray. So we know we can do that easy, and once that's out the way, we don't have to worry about it anymore. That's an important part of being decisive about colors, is just getting the colors that you know are there done. Now, I hope that makes sense, but in the previous video I've actually explained how actually giving yourself little wins is exactly how you accomplish painting a model. And with that base color being so simple, I have a tried and tested gray color set, if you could call it that I like to use, and it's going to be this set. So I know that I said that this was only going to be a grey base, but I changed my mind slightly, and I'm going to be using some of this dark rust color, which is a brown kind of color, and I'm going to spray that just on this little part at the bottom, just to add a little bit of dusty look and make it look like a bit more dirt. I'll explain why. Typically, you don't want the base to take over the looks of your model, and if the base is too complicated and looks like it has too much going on, you're gonna lose all of the effects of the highlights and shadows and everything on the model, which is going to make your model get lost in the entire composition. Composition is very important, and so if I add this brown, it's going to be pretty much hidden at the back here. Look how dark it is anyway, so you're not going to see it much, but it will add just a tiny bit without taking away from the model that goes on top. Hope that makes sense, and I'm just going to do it now, and if it doesn't make sense, well then you're watching something that doesn't make sense. Now, I think it's important to get back to that system I was talking about, and realistically what I like to do is paint things basically black and gray. This gives me the volumes that I need in order to create the composition that I actually want, and by doing this I then know how I need to tint the part. So essentially what my entire process usually is is just throwing paint at something and then tinting it the color that's more correct and closer to the thing that I actually want it to look like. So in the case of the base, I'm going to do all the grays that I wanted, but like I said, I want to be able to tint this and to make it look like the rocks that I want, because gray on its own is just a boring color to look at. And so tinting this with things like blue is going to help to create a bit more saturation, but at the same time I can use brown and stuff in the shadows, and that's also going to help to sell the effects that it's actually dirty without being too dirty. Okay, so now I have the base done, I can put that aside and move on to what is the next step, and that's going to be starting to add some color. Now, the next easiest thing with this entire model is going to be the clear bits, which are like a smoky greeny kind of color. But very importantly, not all of them are smoky green. Some of them, particularly these ones at the back, are a little bit more clear and the other ones are a little bit greener. So I'm going to try to pull out the ones that need to be clear and separate them. Luckily, I have all of the clear parts that I need right here. So I have arranged all these clear parts on my table in pretty much the specific order that they fit on the model. Meaning that these are, obviously, this is the front piece, which has got a nice lovely green glow. So does that piece, so does that piece. So I can obviously take out the parts that I know need to have a green glow, and I can do that on them without ruining anything. Now, I debated with myself over this little visor, but I feel like if I give it a slight tint, it's going to help with the selling of the effect on the rest of the model. I also printed his gats, the awesome little gats that all three of his hands are holding, because I thought I was going to be able to do them with a LED, but unfortunately the size of the little hole that I'd need to put the LED in is just way too small. But the clear is going to help me to at least make it look a little bit different of an effect than painting over a solid color. I can make it look like there is a slight difference in the material, which will help to sell the effect that there is some magical stuff inside of the gun, obviously. I'm kind of unsure how the headlight's going to translate, but I'm going to just go with my gut and keep it in this transparent color, and I will paint these other little bits maybe with a more transparent color, just to try and make, I don't know, I'm going to just see how that works. This part I actually don't know about, and now thrown on the floor. And this is genuinely a part of the entire process. Sometimes you're not going to know about something, but the best thing to do is go and do the things that you do know about. That way you're doing something rather than sitting around with your finger up your bum thinking about what to do about something. So next step is to find something to hold all these bits with, and that's going to be obviously these little doodads, which I'm going to use to hold all the bits in these little crocodile clamps. And then I need to figure out what, I might actually add a tiny tint to the back ones, but I just need to keep them all separate so that I don't get anything confused. And this helps me to just paint without my brain and rather just paint with my skill, which, by the way, we all pretty much have. It's a skill, it's something you can learn. It's not something that you are born with, just putting that out there. This video was sponsored by Toon Studios. This is a Patreon over on Patreon that creates models that are printable files for you to print from some of the cartoons and comics of your youngest years, depending on how old you are, obviously. But for me, a lot of these things are nostalgic as fuck. The tiers for this Patreon start at around $20 a month, and you are getting 2 highly detailed sculpts for that, as well as 30% discount code off their Gumroad models as well. But if you use the link in the description and you type in my code that will be on the screen, this will give you a 30% off for your first month. The model I'm making in this particular video is from their tier 3, and it is obviously an epic model deserving of being in the tier 3, but you will get a discount if you sign up using my code. Check out the link in the description, and let's get back to painting this model. Now, to paint these weird little smoky bits and effects that are on the base, some of the ones in the front have this glowy green effect, and I'm going to need to use some kind of a transparent paint to paint these effects, because if I use something that is opaque, which if I think the meaning of the word is what I think it is, then it would cover up all of the transparency of this resin, which would then take the effects and render them completely useless and be a waste of all of our time. Now, a lot of people may say that they find that the transparent resin is a little bit misty and it's not see-through and shiny like mine is. That is because I've sprayed mine with a very liberal amount of a gloss clear coat. Another easy win, done. all the clear parts done. The base is done. I've got other clear parts drying over in a box because I've used up all my usable space. Now it's time to start working on something else. The next step, I think, is going to be the spaceship. It's going to be easy enough. I need to paint this red and white, but red and white would be kind of boring. I feel like it needs to look a little bit more metallic, so I'm going to give it an undercoat of silver and paint over the top of that and see how that looks. Just by the way, speaking of overloaded, I want you to notice how I'm really living on the edge, because I currently have a model that is resting inside of a model, which is in fact resting inside of a camera, resting on a leg. You're not hobbying unless you're doing it dangerously. To paint the silver, I'm going to use Ammo by MIG silver and paint over the top of everything because it's silver. And it is a really easy color to throw through my airbrush, but at the same time, it also looks like silver, which is a fantastic thing. And it goes quite flat, to be honest, especially out of the airbrush. The next step is to use a red ink and spray that over the top of the silver, which is going to create a sort of candy apple kind of color. The red ink, I will say, is a little bit harsh, and it definitely does kind of dull some of the effect of the candies, but this is still a very good look for something to look metallic-y red. I then used some dark reds in the shadows, for example, like Caribou Crimson, and I sprayed that into the shadowed areas in order to create a much darker shadow, which is going to give us the contrast that will sell the effect that this is in fact a bright red. I'm then going to take some deck tan, I'm going to mix it with a metallic medium to paint the stripes by hand, because you all know that I really despise masking. I used the exact same silver to paint some of the trim around the spaceship itself, and it was around this time that I started to realize I had made a mistake. You may notice a really epic thumbprint on the side of my spaceship, and this is a problem. Obviously, I don't want a thumbprint on the side of Stitch's spaceship because that's just ridiculous. So I took a sponge and some silver paint and I sponged that over the front as well as over the area where I put my really cool thumbprint in, and this hides it. It makes it so that you cannot see it, and now that I've told you, you may be able to see it, but even though I've told you, it's still going to be really hard to notice. And now that I averted that crisis, it's time to move on to the cockpit of the spaceship. And in this space, I'm going to paint everything with a flat color, like a grey over the chair itself, and a painted silver over the inside of the cockpit area. But I'm going to come back in, and I'm going to use some contrast paints, namely a dark black, and I'm going to spray that into the crevasses and around on the inside of that cockpit. Yes, there will be overspray, but I'm actually expecting and anticipating that overspray to help sell the effect on the model. You can see me adding some shadows onto the racing stripe on this spaceship, and by adding those shadows, I'm doing this like I literally don't care, and I'm spraying it so that it oversprays across the blue, red. Colors are hard, words are even hard, but basically what I'm saying is that the overspray doesn't matter. Stop trying to worry about the overspray and just go with it. Just take some shadows and spray them on your model. You might be surprised and it might actually look good, and if it doesn't look good, well then delete my number and never call me again. I'm now going to take a flat black and I'm going to go over all the parts on the model that need to be black for their next steps, because they will be dry brushed perhaps with some silver, or they just need to stay black. For example, I like the areas in this back section of the rocket section, whatever you want to call it. Basically, it needs to be dry brushed with some silver, just like I'm doing on these little boosters on the side of the spaceship as well. And this is going to obviously make it look like it's metallic. The best and easiest way to get something to look metallic for free without doing using too much effort is literally painting it black and then dry brushing some silver over the top of it using your wife's makeup brush. So we are now at a good point for me to explain to you my next few steps. And even though I use the camera to look at the computer and that probably hurts some people's brains, I don't care. But basically, there is a load of heat discoloration on the exhaust and the back ends of where all the hot bits are on the spaceship. Now, while I don't completely hate the actual reference, I don't particularly like how it looks. So this is a part that I'm going to deviate, and I don't normally deviate often, but I quite like how this kind of effect looks. And so it's extremely similar to what the reference looks like, but it's slightly different and definitely going to be a little bit easier to replicate that because it doesn't actually matter if I get it wrong, because there is no reference to prove that it is wrong, other than if you look at the original and then you say, never mind. Either way, what I've done is I've picked out a couple of colors. And often people ask me, how do I go about choosing my colors? Well, all three of these colors are basically see-through. And that's how I chose them. Because one is purple, one is blue, and one is like golden yellow. So, and they're see-through. So that means that when I put them over that, you will see through them a little bit and it will make it look like that. Hope that that makes sense. Let's just do it and hope for the best, because it could be incredibly wrong. So you're going to see me add a new blue. This is Azurman blue, and this is because I was not satisfied with the blue that was part of that Pterodon turquoise, whatever that other color was just not enough. But that color definitely helped for the in-between stage of going from the purple to the actual blue. It just helps to sell that effect really nicely. Now I can move on to there's like these weird little lines on the seat of the spaceship, and I'm gonna paint that with the medium blue. I'm pretty sure that this whole seat was actually meant to be blue and these were just meant to be a lighter blue, but maybe I made a mistake. Who knows? I do know that what I did, and I don't think I actually filmed this part, but I later came back and I sprayed Drakenhof Nightshade, which is a blue wash, over the top of that seat, and that just helped to make it look a little bit more blue, but I still kept it quite on the black side. It just makes more sense in my mind, so that Stitch can stand out off of it. Now the next step for me is going to be painting the yellow markings that are on the front of the spaceship, and you cannot paint yellow over the top of red because you will have a very bad time. While I was there putting the deck tan down to set up my yellow, I also painted the little lights at the back of the spaceship because they need to have a nice shiny green over the top of them at some point during this process. I then added a singular layer of yellow over the top of those markings in the front, and then I worked on adding the glow to the back of those lights. I painted them solidly at first, and then just using my airbrush I just sprayed haphazardly into areas that I thought there should be some overspray from the glow. I also did this on the base as well, but I did this much later and I honestly cannot remember if I recorded that part. I did forget though that the fin needed to be painted red, and for this all I did was paint it with silver solidly and then just painted a red contrast over the top because you really won't notice that it's a different color. Now to move on to the thing that I was definitely unsure about at the beginning, and that was these headlights, but really what I did I think came out freaking perfect. I painted silver over everything, the trimming around the outside as well as on the back of this light. I didn't actually think it would show through as much as it did, but I painted it there just in case. I then painted red over the top of them, and then I sprayed it with a gloss clear coat, and honestly it came out way better than I thought it would. Now it's time to paint the frog, and I'm going to run you very briefly through how I painted this guy. My mindset for this was to keep him kind of desaturated, but in order to do that, I need to give him his color first and then take it away from him after. And I'm going to use some washes to add some texture to this dude, and then I'm literally just going to spray those washes at the body of the frog, making sure to keep some of the highlighted areas, and this will literally make the frog look like it is a normal frog, because frogs are supposed to be boring, as it is not a poisonous Amazon rain dart frog. It's just a normal frog. Well, now that essentially the base is done, because technically the base isn't just the base, because the whole spaceship is the base, and this is actually the model that goes on that base, and that is now done. So now I can start working on Stitch himself, and usually I would argue with myself over the color of what Stitch actually is, but I'm not going to do that now, and I'm literally just going to make him the brightest blue I possibly can in order to stand out like a sore thumb on this massively bright base that I happen to have made. So of course that means picking some more colors, and for these colors I'm going to go as bright as I possibly can. So we're going to start off with the zenithal highlight. Even on his suit, everything is going to be super bright. I want it to be literally like a cartoon in itself. For those of you who have been around for a long time will probably recognize that how I'm about to paint Stitch is exactly how I would paint a space marine. Yes, those tiny little space robot men that the nerds play with on the table, that's exactly how I painted this guy. And that is because, like I said in the beginning of the video, I want Stitch to be the brightest blue that is ever possible. Kind of like when you watch a cartoon and you know that the character is going to interact with something because that part is literally brighter than everything else around it. And as you may notice, I had painted a spaceship that is so bright it hurts your eyeballs to look at it. So I need to make sure that Stitch is just as bright. I started out with a zenithal and I added the blues over the top of his skin, and then I added a red over his suit. I then used a blue ink into the shadows of Stitch because this will give me the contrast so that it adds the depth that we need in order to make it look like it has a lot of three-dimensional axes, if that is even a way to say it. The next step after adding a highlight is to just give it a matte clear coat. This is to soften the surface so it is not shiny, because the blue ink tends to come across a little bit shiny on the surface of your model. And then after that I decided to paint his nose with this dark blue color that I had, which was just way too dark. So I ended up taking some medium blue and doing what is known as a wet blend over across the top of his nose. Now this is not as prominent as I wanted it to be, but you can see that it is brighter in the center and a little bit darker around the edges. Now I need to go around and paint all the trimming on his body, and for that I literally just used like a darkish gray to paint them one solid gray. Because there is some gradient on the suit itself, painting these with just literally one color is not going to look weird at all. I promise you, most people may think you need to have shadows and highlights and all sorts. These little trim things do not need that. You can add that, but in most cases you can get away with not doing that. And the other reason that you can get away with doing that is because you can add other little details, like for example this dark red that I'm going to use to go around the rest of the trimming, which is very reminiscent of the trim that is on the seat, but it's on his suit as well. Obviously this is a good way for a modeler to tie in the model pieces together, but I just used a darker red over the top of this, and this obviously just ties everything in and makes it look epic. Now there are some yellow triangles on his arms, and obviously I've already said this before, but you need to set them up, and in order to set them up I just use some deck tan to paint what is like a white underneath there, so that when I come back and paint the yellow over the top, it will literally be yellow and not whatever the color it would be when I try to put that over the top of anything but white. Now it is time for me to start on the face of this little alien creature thing, and to be honest, his eyes, I debated with myself over whether he had actual sclera in his eyes or whether they were just solid black, but the truth is the cartoon version of him is solid black, so I pretty much decided to go with a solid black. I could have maybe put a bit of a gradient in them, but I was happy with how they looked just being black on their own, and then I started to work on the ears. And for the ears, I started out with a skin tone color, and I then tinted that with a bit of pink. I used essentially the skin tone first and kept it quite wet, while then wet blending some pink over the top of that, creating the color that I wanted on the inside of the ears. I used the exact same pink to paint the insides of his mouth, particularly around the gums, because when I come back and paint the whites over his teeth, I want the gums to be nice and pink, and this is the easiest way to do it. The next step was to create a bit of a darker area of the pink, and I used Magos purple through my airbrush on a low pressure to paint that into the bottom sections of the ears. I then took a much lighter blue and I painted that around his eyes. Now this is a point of contention for me because I personally don't really like the look of New Stitch, but I'm going to accept it, and I'm just going to try and get those lighter parts of his body onto him in one way, shape or form or another. I just feel like the new live action one does not look like the Stitch that I expected him to look like. However, that's what we got and that's what we're going to work with, so I added those blue parts that are lighter on his face, around his chin and also around his eyeballs. I'm now going to take some highlight skin, and this is a difficult color to get hold of because unfortunately it comes from a set, the Nocturna set, Fairy Flesh set, which I used for many years, and annoyingly it's really hard to come by that set. So this is probably something like an ivory white. It's just not an actual white. If you used an actual white, it's gonna look a little bit weird, and I can't really explain that phenomenon to you, but basically white is the only thing you want to use in highlights of things, like on the specular highlights of his eyes, which I'm now going to cover with a gloss coat of paint from Tamiya, the X22 to be precise. Now all we have left to do are the gats that are on his hands. All three of them, exactly three of them, because he has three out while he uses the other hand to climb out of the spaceship. And for these gats, I painted them with a red over the clear. And I obviously printed them in clear because I originally was going to put LEDs in them, but the space was just way too small. So I ended up just going with what I ended up going with, which was what I did. Basically, I painted red over the top of them to give it a slightly different look, and then I masked off all the areas of red that I wanted to keep, and I sprayed the skin in the exact same way that I would have painted it on his face. I then came back and painted his nails with that dark blue that I originally spoke of, and then I took this bronze metallic paint from Monument Hobbies and I painted that over all of the rest of the gats. Now, to be honest, going over a gloss paint once you've put it down on top of something sometimes is a bit of a biatch, but don't worry about it. If you persevere and take your time, that first layer is going to look absolutely awful, but once it dries, it gives the next layers something to stick to. The next step is going to be taking this Tesseract glow and spraying it over the front end of the gats in order to create a glowy effect from it. I'm then going to take some Agrax Earthshade and I'll spray that into the shadows to create a little bit more depth. Then I'm going to take a little bit of white and go around the rim of the area where the light's coming out from, put them on the model, and I can call this one done. Now we have reached the end of yet another Groundeffected video, and of course this one was honestly one of the really funnest models I've had to do in a little while because the colors are so bright and powerful. I actually really enjoy making things as saturated as I have made this model. This particular one is going to go to my wife, and that is because she is honestly the most incredible person in the world and she loves Stitch so much, so I'm gonna give it to her so we can put it into our new house when we move in, hopefully, and it's going to be something I can look at every single day, probably next to my Bumblebee. But this is digressing from the fact that I am now outroing a video, and I want to say a massive thank you, obviously, for all the support that I've had over the last few years, but also very importantly to my Patreons who have been supporting me through their teeth, and they keep the lights blinding my eyeballs and genuinely keep this thing going, whatever it is that we want to call it. I also want to mention there is an overall on my own Patreon. If you're interested, click the link in the description so you can go and check it out yourself, but also go and check out the sponsor of this video, because they too also do keep the lights on, and it is very important that we all check out all the links in the description. And while you're down there, don't forget to click subscribe. We're so close to 100,000 subscribers, which would mean nothing, but doesn't matter. Let's just try get there. And if you didn't like anything you saw, obviously this is the point. In fact, you should have done it earlier, but either way, I'm just going to tell you anyway, you should probably fuck off.